Senatobia District, it is so good to be home. Bishop, did you know this was my district?
Oh, no, I
As
didn't.
a little kid about this big, all the way up. This was my district till I began to travel around. And then all of them became my favorite. So happy to be here with y'all. The General Conference, as it came together, it had to deal with some major objectives administratively, because if you deal with rules that you set after you've decided what you're going to do, you're not being fair to everybody. So the General Conference felt it must deal with some basic rules. If churches leave, if clergy leave, if churches decide to disaffiliate, how do we work through that? And so they said, we're going to decide that first, and then we'll begin to look at the other things that are happening. So the first things they dealt with is how do we reduce the cost of pensions to the local church if a pastor leaves? We need to be sure that we make sure that the churches are not paying for pensions of pastors that have left the United Methodist Church. The second piece is how do we collect money from the churches that are leaving so that they can contribute to the promises they made and fulfill their promises and covenants with us as we were United Methodists in connection. And then the third piece that we had to deal with was what's the disaffiliation process? If a church really wants to leave, what's that process as it regards human sexuality? So those were the three that they dealt with first. Now there's a couple of things we got to understand, and you know, I hate definitions. Ms. Jepson can tell you that I didn't do real well when she taught me on these definitions. That, Bishop, you don't need to talk to Ms. Jepson down there. I want you to learn too much about me. We got to talk about the two types of pension plans. There are two pension plans. How many of you are school teachers in here? Work for the federal government, state government. You get an annuity when you retire, right? And that annuity comes your whole life until you're gone. Same amount or a little increase inside there. Who pays for that? The taxpayers, right? We've got to be sure we have enough money in the bank so that the treasurer of the state of Mississippi can send those checks out to the retirees. That's called a defined benefit. It's a formula that tells us how much you get. But the funding of that belongs to the paying entity, you, the church. The annual conference has to guarantee that. So that's a defined benefit. What's my benefit for the rest of my life? The other one is a defined contribution. Now, the defined contribution says we're going to give you X number of dollars every year. You put it away, you earn interest on it, and you spend it smartly so that you've got enough money to live your life out. It's like a savings account. And that's generally what happens with general business out there in the 401ks, that type plan. Some of you have those. That I got an amount of money and I got to make it last. So I have the responsibility of having enough money in the bank, and I make wise investments. So the risk then is on me. So what we're talking about in these two different type pension plan, who's responsible for the risk that it lasts long enough, and the risk that I keep it invested wisely so that I will have enough money to care for myself for the rest of my life. So if that's the two type pension plans there are, then let's think about the three types of plans that we have in the United Methodist Church for our clergy. Now we've got the pre-82, that one's kind of a no-brainer. That was the people that worked prior to 1982. And that's a defined benefit. Because we say we're going to give you X number of dollars for each year that you work for the rest of your life. We got the risk as the conference and the local churches. Then we said, ooh, that's not going too well for us. We've had unfunded liability. What do we do? Well, let's change the pension plan and let's have the ministerial pension plan, which basically was a defined contribution. Each year you worked, you got money, you put it in the bank, it was invested, it went along, and when I retired, it was mine. Defined contribution. Well, we kind of thought about that for a while. In 2006, we said, maybe we ought to have something different. So we did. We got a little of each one of them. We got the clergy benefits security plan, which is a defined benefit and a defined contribution. Okay? So you got the three types of plans. We had a defined benefit pre-82, we had a defined contribution ministerial pension plan, and we had both in the Clergy Retirement Security Program. So if that's the type plans we've got, then Westpath brought to the floor of conference, how do we deal with clergy that are leaving and how do we deal with churches that are leaving so that we manage our cost? And so when you think about it, the first one that we had to deal with was, what about the payment of pension for clergy who surrender their credentials? I'm leaving here my credentials. What about my pension that belongs to me that I've earned? And we want them to have it now. Don't miss that. We want them to have what they earned as they were United Methodist ministers. What we got to realize is what didn't change. Hear me clearly. Nothing for the clergy that remain United Methodist changed. We can all take a deep breath as we sit here together. Because your pension is your pension. The ministerial pension plan did not change because it's a savings account. And when you retire, you just take it with you. You can leave it at Westpath. That's the General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits' new name, Westpath. So you can take it with you and make sure you invest it well. Don't spend it all the first day, and you got it made. Now, what did change is when we talk about these clergy that surrender their credentials according to the 2016 discipline in the Board of Ordained Ministries, paragraph 360, and the Westpath part 1504. This describes how pensions that have been earned are paid out for those that are leaving the denomination. And the only one we got to worry about, remember, is the defined benefit. Oop, wrong button. James, there we go. So the defined benefit inside of the pre-82 and the crisp defined benefit, what we'll do is we'll convert that to a cash basis. And when the pastor leaves, we say, here's what you've earned, congratulations, and take the money with you. That way you as the local church are not responsible for taking care of that long payment. The person has that responsibility. And who are we caring for? We're caring for those clergy that remained with us. Because we've got to be concerned that we have the right money to pay those benefits. Now, we'll allow the people that are leaving to leave their money in the United Methodist Pension Plan because they carry the risk, they carry the longevity. It's just a really good group of investors. Probably some of the best I have ever seen. The other things that happen when people leave, when clergy leave, is your death benefits. Those go away. We're not guaranteeing a life insurance policy when they leave. And if retired clergy leave, then they also lose their death benefit. The retired clergy and those that are leaving will not have any post-retirement health benefit, nor can they buy insurance inside our plan because they're not a part of the conference anymore. So those two benefits are lost. Now remember, all of this was effective February 27th, 2019 at the close of the session. So when he closed, this was the rules. Clear about that? So now we got the clergy that are leaving and how we care for their pensions and give them everything they've earned while they were doing United Methodist ministry. So what about these churches that leave that in covenant with us in the connection as 1,247 churches or 952 churches or whatever year you want to talk about? How do we make sure those promises that we made we're able to uphold? And we have to do that with a pension withdrawal penalty. We did not have that in the original when we first lost a couple of churches that were up here in your area. That was not available to us. That's why this was so important for us to understand how the churches contribute to that to care for their costs in the plan. And here's how it works. Should a church decide to disaffiliate, they need to pay a pension penalty, and that pension penalty is determined by Westpath. What is the unfunded liability of the plan? They send the numbers to me, and I'll share them with the conference appropriately. And then the annual conference will say, here's how we're going to divide this up among those churches that are leaving. Something similar to mission shares. You know, that's one of my favorite topics. Latoya, I just love talking about mission shares. That's ministry together. Woo, okay, that's not what we're here for. The local church's fair share will be their index. Remember, your part over all of them together, we get an index, multiply it by what General Conference West Pat said to us, and we've got a number. It's fair to everybody at that point. It applies to all changes. Now, this is what's different. It applies to all changes in relationship. If a church closes, if a church is abandoned, if a church decides to disaffiliate, they made a covenant with us in connection to pay their part, and this has got to be paid to be able to do that. This is a change to the current Book of Discipline of 2016, and it remains in effect until when? The bishop taught you. When did he say? When the next conference comes along and says we're going to do it a different way, right? I don't think that will change. I think that's a pretty fair thing that was done. But hey, I do not have a crystal ball, and so I will say, Bishop, next conference we'll know right after it's over whether it happened or not. So if we understand how clergy receive their funds if they're disaffiliating with us, surrendering their credentials, and if a church is leaving, how they pay. What is disaffiliation? Man, it's a fancy word. We called it graceful exit all along. Graceful exit. There were 4 petitions related to that, and the first one was booted, Stephen. It just didn't make it. And so graceful exit didn't make it either because it became disaffiliation in the last 3 petitions. Well, the second petition and the third petition were rejected for the Taylor disaffiliation. Now, what you got to understand is it passed, there were some amendments to it, but it was also flawed constitutionally. Bishop's going to explain a little more of that later. So here's how the process works. It's called the Taylor disaffiliation. Local churches who disaffiliate have until December the 31st, 2023 to say, we do not agree with the way the United Methodist General Conference 2019 dealt with human sexuality. We don't agree with it and we want to leave. That's who this disaffiliation plan belongs to. That's who can make that election. And what happens is that the district superintendent will receive a letter from the church. The church will have a church conference, and 2/3 of the professing members will have to vote in the affirmative of those in attendance. So 2/3 of the attendees have to vote to disaffiliate. That's the second piece. The third piece of Taylor was that the conference trustees handled the disaffiliation. This started out allowing the bishops to, and that's kind of out of line. Bishops don't do that. That's what the conference trustees are responsible for. So that was changed. The next thing that's required is 2 years' worth of apportionments. You got to pay the current year and another year of the same amount. And then you got to pay the withdrawal penalty. So those are the 2 payments that are in there. And once payment has been made by the disaffiliating church, the trust clause is released by the conference trustees for those churches that disagree with the stance of the United Methodist Church on human sexuality. Constitutionality is uncertain on this one. Bishop will talk more about that in a minute. But this one, we're going to have to wait till April to see, is this really the way it's going to work or not? But in Mississippi, as y'all are well aware of, in this district up here, because you lived it first, there is a process for churches to leave. And inside that process, everything is kind of similar to what we've talked about. But remember, we didn't have the pension penalty early on. But we did value the churches. And if you decide you want to leave, then the church is closed and the property can be sold if we don't have a process that we want to keep the property. Now, I got to tell y'all, we're really blessed in Mississippi. We've got a great leader in our bishop. But we've got 2 other groups that are great leaders. It's our Council on Finance and Administration. I see 2 of them sitting here on the front. And it's our conference trustees. Because as they were faced with this problem early on, they thought through this and put together a fair process to everybody. And quite honestly, if you take the Taylor disaffiliation and look at it, it's got Mississippi written all over it. Folks, we lead the denomination in our work and administrative task. And I am so proud of our bishop and our CFNA and our trustees that they were able to put this together and lead the denomination in how it goes. And so, I'm done.